Have you ever wondered what a town looked like after sunset before the invention of electricity? Streets that now glow with bulbs and neon once fell into a darkness so deep that even familiar corners seemed strange. Yet people did not surrender to the dark. They fought it, shaped it, and lived within it, using small, flickering flames. This is the story of how they kept towns bright when modern light did not exist. Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you enjoy these calm journeys into the past, you may gently subscribe so you can always join the next quiet history when night comes again. As the sun set, life changed quickly. The warm haze of dusk gave way to shadows pooling in doorways and stretching across cobblestones. People hurried to finish tasks while there was still light. Have you ever noticed how even now in our lit world we feel an instinct to finish things before darkness falls? That instinct was sharper then. For them, once the sun disappeared, safety depended on flame. They lit candles in homes, lamps in streets, torches in squares. These fires were not only sources of brightness, but also companions, steadying hearts against the weight of the unknown. The first defense against darkness was always the small flame. Candles sat on wooden tables, dripping wax slowly as families gathered near. The glow was soft, golden, and uneven. Did it light an entire room? Not fully. Shadows lingered in corners, and faces leaned close to see each other clearly. But the flame gave enough. Enough to finish a meal, enough to tell a story, enough to reassure children that the night had not swallowed the world completely. The candle's flicker stitched households together, pulling them into closeness. Outside, lanterns hung on posts or swung in the hands of those who still had to walk. A lantern was not just a container of fire, it was a symbol of presence. Its circle of light moved with its bearer, touching walls, flashing across puddles, reflecting in windows. Did it turn night into day? No, it carved out small islands of safety and seas of dark. Those islands were precious. People knew where lanterns burned, and they used them as waypoints. If you saw a lantern in the distance, you felt less alone. Torches played their part too, especially in places where gatherings happened. Their flames roared brighter than candles, but they smoked and hissed, throwing sparks into the air. Imagine a town square lined with torches during an event. Walls painted orange, shadows jumping wildly, faces glowing with energy. These moments felt alive, transforming ordinary spaces into places of memory. Did torches last long? Not very, but for their brief span they could make a town shine as though it had captured the sun itself. Oil lamps were another tool, steady and practical. Filled with carefully prepared fuel, they burned with cleaner light than many candles. In houses where people worked late, copying records, sewing cloth, or mending tools, oil lamps were companions. They did not roar like torches or dance like candles. They glowed patiently. Their steadiness made them beloved. Have you ever felt comfort in a lamp that stays the same even when everything else around flickers? That was the gift of oil lamps, quiet constancy. The watchmen of towns carried light as part of their duty. Their lanterns were signals as much as tools. When their glow appeared at the end of a street, it said, "The night is not abandoned." People inside their homes, half awake, sometimes glimpsed this moving circle of fire through shutters. Did it chase away all danger? Not at all. But it reminded them someone walked outside, steady and awake. The lantern was a promise that the town had not fallen entirely into silence. Even the smallest gestures mattered. A candle placed in a window was not simply for the household. It spread comfort to the street. A lantern lit at a gate meant travelers could find their way. A torch left at a crossroad gave courage to anyone passing by. These small acts of light formed a web across the town. Have you ever seen stars in the sky and felt them as a connected pattern, even though each burns alone? That is how light in old towns felt. Tiny, separate sparks that together created a sense of order. But light was fragile. Wind could snuff it, rain could drown it, carelessness could waste it. That fragility made light precious. Families guarded candles as carefully as food. A single wasted wick was more than inconvenience. It was a lost shield against night. Could this make people fearful? Not always. It made them resourceful. They trimmed wicks to last longer, polished lantern glass to shine brighter, and shared fire with neighbors when one flame failed. The absence of electricity did not mean the absence of brightness. It meant brightness required attention. Each spark had to be tended, each lamp refilled, each candle watched. People lived closer to their light, aware of it in ways we often forget. Have you ever considered how little you think of a switch today? Back then, light was never mindless. It was an act to strike flint, to set wick, to protect flame. Every act carried meaning, and so towns before electricity were not swallowed in endless dark. They shimmered faintly like a tapestry woven with fire. Streets glowed in patches. Windows flickered softly. Squares burned brightly during events. Travelers carried circles of light wherever they went. The night was still vast, but it was not empty. It was shaped by human effort, by fire turned into guidance, by the shared will to keep shadows at bay. This, then, is how people kept their towns bright, not with machines or wires, but with flame, fragile yet powerful, fleeting yet unforgettable. Each spark was more than survival. It was a gentle declaration that the night could be lived in, not feared. Have you ever noticed how fragile a flame is? A single breath can extinguish it, a drop of water can drown it, and a gust of wind can scatter it into smoke. Yet for centuries, towns depended on such delicate sparks to survive the long nights. Without electricity, light was not permanent. It was vulnerable. And because of that, people developed entire ways of life around protecting and preserving their fire. As dusk fell, families did not simply strike a match and expect comfort. They prepared carefully. Candles were set upright, wicks trimmed to the right length, and holders placed to catch dripping wax. Lamps were refilled with oil, their glass shields cleaned from soot. Torches were wrapped tighter, ready to burn longer. Each action was a ritual of attention, not superstition, but practice. Have you ever checked a door twice before leaving home, simply for peace of mind? That was how people treated their light. They knew that neglecting one small step could cost them hours of safety. Inside homes, light was precious. A single candle often had to serve an entire family. They would gather around it, leaning close, adjusting tasks to its flicker. Sewing was done near the flame. Reading required steady placement, words bending, and straightening with each movement of the wick. Children sat nearby, their shadows stretching tall across walls. Did they mind the dimness? They adapted to it. Their eyes learned to read subtler shades, to notice details we overlook in bright electric rooms. The sharing of fire was common. If one family's candle burned out unexpectedly, a child might run to a neighbor's door carrying a small holder to borrow a spark. The act of lending fire was as natural as lending food. It reminded people that light was not just a private possession, but a communal safeguard. Imagine the relief of seeing a neighbor's lantern appear when your own flame failed. That glow meant connection, trust, and the reassurance that you were not alone in the dark. Lanterns outside were just as fragile. A sudden gust could snuff them, leaving streets in darkness. That is why many were built with shields of horn, glass, or thin metal. These cases did not brighten the flame, but protected it. A lantern without. A shield was like a soldier without armor, brave but vulnerable. Did these shields always work? Not perfectly. Wind still found cracks, rain still seeped in, but they increased survival. Each night's patrol included checking lanterns, relighting them when needed, and shielding them better if storms approached. Oil lamps brought steadiness, but also risk. Spilled oil could stain, smoke could choke, and if tipped, fire could spread. That is why lamp placement mattered. People learned to balance them on firm surfaces, away from cloth or wood that could catch fire. They lived with constant awareness of fragility. Have you ever balanced a glass of water on an unsteady table, always aware of the risk? For them, every lamp was like that, something to watch, not something to ignore. Torches burned with boldness, but ended quickly. Their flames roared, their smoke filled the air, and their wood cracked with heat. Town squares lit by torches, glowed like stages, alive and dramatic. But when the torches guttered out, the darkness returned suddenly, heavier than before. People understood this rhythm. Brightness followed by emptiness, light followed by shadow. It reminded them that flame was never endless. Each torch was a brief victory against night, not a permanent one. Even the sparks used to ignite light carried importance. Flint struck against steel sent small bursts flying, each one holding the possibility of a new candle, a new lamp, a new torch. Children often watched their parents strike flint with fascination, seeing whole worlds of safety born from a single spark. Was it quick and easy? Not always. Damp air, poor tinder, or tired hands could make the task frustrating. But patience always won, because without persistence there could be no brightness. The fragility of light made people more aware of its beauty. Shadows danced with every flicker, walls breathed with flame, and the smallest glow looked like gold against blackness. Imagine sitting in a silent room where only a single candle burns. The flame becomes the center of the world. That was nightly reality, and people grew intimate with it. They saw how wax curled, how wicks bent, how smoke twisted into the air. These were not details to ignore. They were part of life. Even travelers knew the value of fragile flames. They carried lanterns carefully, shielding them under cloaks or hands. A flame lost on the road meant stumbling in dark paths, danger in unseen holes, or fear in unknown woods. Did they fear losing their flame? Of course. That is why groups often traveled together, sharing lanterns, making sure that if one failed, another still burned. Light was fragile, but together people made it endure. So what does the fragility of fire teach us about towns before electricity? That brightness was never effortless. It required constant attention, steady care, and shared responsibility. Flames may have been vulnerable, but they shaped every corner of life. Their weakness turned into strength because it made people cherish and protect them. Without electricity, towns did not vanish into endless darkness. They glimmered, shimmered, and breathed with fragile flames, each one a reminder that even the smallest spark could push back the greatest shadow. Have you ever stepped into a dark street and felt a single lamp change everything? Before electricity, the streets of towns relied on just such flames, modest glows that could transform fear into reassurance. People walking after dusk knew that lanterns, torches, or even candles set outside houses were more than conveniences. They were lifelines shaping the rhythm of movement through the night. Streets were the veins of a town, and without light they became dangerous. Uneven stones could trip a hurried step, carts left aside could block a path, and strangers moving unseen could cause unease. So people sought to give their lanes some measure of brightness. Did they succeed in banishing the dark? Never entirely, but they created patches of glow, and these were enough to carry the town from dusk to dawn. Lanterns mounted on posts were the most common solution. Their flames glimmered through shields of glass or horn, soft circles of light reaching across. Cobblestones. Were they evenly spaced? Rarely. Some corners had several, others none at all. The result was a pattern of islands, safe pools of brightness separated by long stretches of shadow. People learned to walk from one island to another, timing their steps so they always moved toward light. Travelers arriving at night felt the difference immediately. At the gates, torches burned, announcing the boundary of the town. Inside, the first rows of houses often kept lanterns lit, offering warmth to strangers. But farther in, light grew scarce. Have you ever walked down a road where the first lamps shine bright, but the rest fade into shadow? That was the feeling. Security fading as you left the better-tended lanes. Shops sometimes left lights outside as well, even when closed. A candle in a window, a lamp on a step, a torch bracketed to a wall. These glows were gestures of hospitality as much as practicality. They told passers-by, "Here is a safe corner, here is a familiar place." Did this cost households effort? Yes, fuel and wax were never free, but many chose to do it anyway, because light meant trust, and trust meant business when morning came. Have you considered how the sound of footsteps changes under light? In shadow, every step feels louder, sharper, more alone. Under lantern glow, steps seem steadier, as though the flame itself shares the rhythm. People spoke of feeling watched over by the lanterns, even though the lanterns had no eyes. Light gave companionship, even when no one else was near. The night. Watchmen depended on these scattered flames as well. Their patrols were easier in streets where lanterns burned. They relieved those that failed, trimmed wicks, and carried spare sparks. To them, each flame was not just guidance, but proof of order. Where a lantern stood dark, suspicion rose. Had the wind put it out, or had someone interfered? Their task was to keep the chain of glows unbroken. Even carriages made use of street brightness. Though drivers carried their own lanterns, they steered more confidently, where posts burned. Horses, too, calmed when flames outlined their way. In darker stretches, animals spooked easily, halting at shadows or veering from unseen shapes. Street flames were modest, but they shaped the very rhythm of travel. And yet, despite all this effort, darkness always outnumbered light. The glow of lanterns was thin, their reach short. Beyond each circle, shadows thickened immediately. Did this frustrate people? Not exactly. They understood that light was not meant to conquer the night, only to tame it enough for life to continue. Darkness was always a neighbor. Light was the friend that made it bearable. Perhaps that is why people valued street flames so deeply. Each lantern was fragile, each candle brief, each torch smoky and loud. But together they stitched the town into something livable. They allowed bakers to begin work before dawn, messengers to cross streets safely, guards to patrol with confidence, and neighbors to walk home after late tasks. Even now, as you listen to this quiet history, you may feel something of that rhythm, the soft comfort of scattered light shaping the dark. And if these calm journeys bring you peace, you may gently subscribe, so you never miss the next walk through the quiet towns of the past. So what was the glow of old streets? It was not brilliance, but a chain of humble sparks. It was not permanence, but persistence. It was the courage of small flames that refused to let darkness rule entirely. And in their flicker, the town found its way. Have you ever thought about how much effort it once took just to keep a town glowing at night? Today, light arrives with a simple flick of a switch. It is instant, tireless, and almost invisible in effort. But long before electricity, every spark of brightness that touched a street or a home came from labor, patient, steady, and often unseen. The glow of a single lantern was the end of a long chain of work that began long before nightfall. To begin, there was the gathering of materials. Candles did not appear from nowhere, nor did oil for lamps, nor wood for torches. People spent hours preparing for light that might last only a short while. A candle required wax or tallow, both harvested and processed by hand. Oil lamps needed steady supplies of fuel, pressed from seeds, nuts, or fish. Torches demanded bundles of resinous wood wrapped and tied. Every household that hoped to chase away darkness had to think ahead, gathering and saving throughout the day, so the night would not catch them empty-handed. Have you ever considered how many small steps go into something we now take for granted? For them, each flame was the product of many. Candles in particular tell the story of hidden work. Wicks had to be twisted from fibers strong enough to hold steady in melting wax. Wax itself had to be melted, poured, cooled, and poured again, layer upon layer, until a single candle stood tall enough to burn for hours. Poorer families often settled for tallow, cheaper but smoky and foul-smelling, while wealthier homes might afford beeswax, smoother and longer lasting. Did children notice the difference? Of course. A tallow candle filled a room with odor, while beeswax gave a sweeter air. Yet in both cases the flame was treasured equally, for both meant vision in a world that otherwise turned blind at sunset. Lanterns also carried the weight of hidden labor. Their frames of iron or wood had to be forged or carved, their panels fitted with horn or glass to shield the flame. Have you ever polished a piece of glass and noticed how much brighter it shines afterward? The same was true then. A lantern unpolished dulled the light, but a lantern cared for could stretch a single flame across several more steps of cobblestone. Families took time to clean soot from lantern walls, trimming wicks to just the right height, learning through trial how to balance air and flame. Torches may have seemed bold and simple, but they too came from preparation. Wood had to be cut to the right thickness, resin gathered from trees, cloth wrapped tightly to hold the fuel. And then, of course, someone had to light it, watching carefully for drips or sparks. In crowded squares, torchbearers stood ready to replace old with new, a small team behind the brightness. Did townsfolk think of them often? Likely not. But without their labor, the moments of firelit gatherings would have ended far too quickly. Even oil lamps required constant tending. Oil was pressed in daylight, stored in jars, carried to houses. Wicks had to be cut and placed just right, not too long or too short, or else the flame smoked heavily. The glow they gave was patient, but it demanded patience in return. Those who worked by lamp, scribes, seamstresses, guards, learned the art of trimming without snuffing, of adding fuel without spilling. Each motion was careful, as though the lamp itself was a partner in their work. The labor extended beyond objects to people's daily rhythm. Children were sent to fetch wood for torches, to carry candles carefully from storage, to run for neighbors when a flame went out. Women and men alike learned how to tend fires late into the night, their minds half on their tasks and half on protecting their light. Have you ever tried to finish a job by candlelight and felt the frustration of shadows flickering across your work? That was their nightly battle. But frustration turned into skill, and skill turned into habit, until even the smallest flame could be stretched to serve more than one task. Towns themselves invested in this hidden labor. Posts for lanterns had to be built, their holders fastened to walls, their fuel supplied regularly. Someone always bore responsibility for refilling, relighting, and checking. The watchman often helped, carrying spare candles or oil to replace those that failed. In this way, the work of many individuals turned into a web of shared responsibility. When you walked through a lit street at night, you were not only seeing flames, you were seeing the combined work of dozens of hands. And then there was the constant attention once flames were lit. Candles needed watching so wax did not overflow. Lamps smoked without trimming. Torches sparked too dangerously if left alone. People did not simply set light and forget it. They sat with it, glanced at it, adjusted it. Imagine a family around a single candle. One person stirs the wick, another shields it from a draft, another adds a fresh taper if the flame falters. Light was a living thing, fragile and needy, and families treated it as such. This hidden work also gave towns a different sense of value. Light was never wasted casually. A candle burned only as long as needed, a lamp snuffed when the last task ended, a torch reserved for nights when gathering was essential. Have you ever noticed how we now leave lights on in empty rooms without thought? They could not. Each flame consumed hours of labor, and so each flame was respected. To waste one was to dishonor the time it took to create it. So the hidden work behind every flame teaches us something simple, yet powerful. Light was not free, not effortless, not invisible. It was labor turned into glow, care turned into comfort, patience turned into vision. Without electricity, the brightness of a town was not a given. It was earned every single night. And in that earning, people found not only safety but meaning. Have you ever imagined what a marketplace looked like once the sun had set and stalls stood empty? We often think of markets as bustling daytime places, filled with shouts, laughter, and the clatter of goods being exchanged. But in towns without electricity, the market also had a nighttime life, quieter, softer, and defined entirely by firelight. When the last sellers packed their baskets and carts, shadows quickly poured into the square. The lively colors of fabrics, fruits, and tools vanished into grays and blacks. Yet the square did not remain abandoned. Travelers still passed through, watchmen patrolled, and neighbors occasionally met in the open space. To make this possible, light had to remain. Torches were fixed at corners, lanterns hung at gates, and sometimes candles glowed faintly in the windows of surrounding shops. Did this turn night into day? Not at all, but it carved out enough brightness to keep the square alive. The glow of torches gave the market a dramatic air. Their flames leapt and hissed, sending smoke upward and shadows racing across walls. Imagine walking through a square where every object doubled itself as a shadow, long and twisting. The same baskets that had been filled with food hours earlier now looked like looming shapes, their outlines exaggerated. Did this frighten people? Not usually. They were used to it, but it added mystery to familiar spaces. Lanterns offered steadier light. Hung from posts, they swayed with the breeze, circles of gold dancing on cobblestones. A single lantern might not seem powerful, but a row of them created a chain of guidance. People crossing the market after dark learned to follow these small islands of brightness. Have you ever noticed how your eyes relax when you move from one lit point to another in darkness? That was exactly how people walked the square, from flame to flame, shadow to shadow, until they reached the other side. Sometimes markets hosted nighttime gatherings. Seasonal fairs, dances, or public announcements drew people into the square after sunset. On such nights, extra torches were prepared, sometimes hundreds of them planted in rows or circles. The square would blaze, every face glowing orange, every voice echoing under open sky. These were the rare times when darkness seemed pushed back fully, when townspeople felt a kind of joy in seeing their familiar square burn bright with celebration. But such moments cost dearly in fuel and labor, so they were occasional luxuries. Even on quiet nights, the marketplace had its own rhythm. Watchmen checked the corners, relighting flames if wind or rain had snuffed them. Carriages passing through cast their own glow from hand lanterns, briefly adding more circles of light before vanishing into streets beyond. Windows in surrounding houses sometimes glowed faintly, their flames spilling onto the square like small gifts of comfort. Shadows were as much a part of the square as flames. Have you ever played with your own shadow under a street lamp? Imagine that multiplied across dozens of figures. Long silhouettes stretched across stalls and walls, moving like silent companions. Children sometimes found amusement in this, chasing their shadows or trying to step on another's elongated form. Adults, too, found reassurance in seeing their shadows beside them. It was proof that light still held them, even in darkness. The smells of the marketplace changed at night as well. Smoke from torches filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of food left behind by day. The hiss of flames joined with the occasional cry of a night vendor or the bark of a dog. All these small details made the market after dark a place of quiet drama, not busy, not loud, but alive in its own way. So why did towns keep markets lit at night at all? Because the square was not only for trade, but for passage. Roads met there. People crossed it to reach homes, and watchmen relied on its openness for safety. Without light, the square would have become a pit of shadows, dangerous for carts, horses, and travelers. With light, even faint light, it remained the heart of the town, pulsing softly, even in silence. And this glow, fragile and flickering, was enough. Markets at night were not bright in the way we know brightness today, but they shimmered with human effort, with fire turned into order. Each torch and lantern told the same story, that people refused to surrender their most important spaces to darkness. Have you ever thought about what it meant to journey at night in a world without electricity? Roads stretching into darkness, forests whispering with unseen movement, bridges barely visible under moonlight. For travelers, the difference between safety and danger often came down to a single flame carried in a lantern. These fragile lights became companions, guides, and protectors on countless nighttime journeys. Travelers prepared carefully before setting out. A lantern was not something to grab casually. It needed fuel, a trimmed wick, and a strong frame to withstand wind. The glass or horn panels had to be cleaned of soot, and the handle checked to ensure it would not fail. Have you ever packed a bag and double-checked every item before a long trip? That was how travelers treated their lanterns. To forget one detail could mean stumbling blindly through unknown paths. On the road, lanterns did more than shine. They calmed horses, whose eyes widened at sudden shadows. They reassured passengers, who leaned forward to watch the circle of light bouncing over stones. They even signaled to other travelers approaching from the distance. A glow on the horizon meant company, or at least another human presence. Did this make night roads less lonely? Yes, because a flame seen far away was proof that someone else walked under the same dark sky. Groups of travelers often shared the burden of light. One lantern might lead, others following behind, each keeping its circle close enough to overlap with the next. Together they formed a chain of brightness. Imagine a dark road lit by 5 lanterns, their circles touching like beads on a string. That sight gave courage, for even when one faltered, the others remained. But lanterns were fragile companions. A gust of wind could snuff them, rain could dim them, careless handling could break them. That is why travelers guarded them so closely. They shielded them under cloaks, tilted them away from the wind, and paused to relight them when necessary. Have you ever cupped your hands around a flame outdoors, protecting it against the breeze? Multiply that care by hours, and you will know what it meant to carry light on an old road. Lanterns also shaped how people timed their journeys. Few dared to walk completely in darkness, so they traveled when the moon was bright or when enough. Lanterns were available. Inns and way stations often placed lamps at their doors, glowing like promises of shelter. For a weary traveler, seeing such light in the distance was like seeing hope itself. The glow meant food, warmth, and safety from the road. Different types of lanterns served different needs. Some were small, meant to be carried in the hand. Others were larger, fixed to carts or hung on poles. A wealthy traveler might have lanterns mounted at the front of a carriage, throwing stronger light ahead. A poorer one might rely on a single, small lamp swinging with each step. Did the size of the lantern decide the safety of the journey? Not entirely, but brighter flames gave more comfort, and comfort mattered when the road stretched long. Bridges were especially dangerous without light. Water below reflected the moon, but shadows made the structure itself hard to see. Lanterns guided feet over wooden planks, preventing slips or falls. Watchmen sometimes left lamps at these crossings, but often travelers had to provide their own. Have you ever walked across a bridge at night, hearing water but not seeing it clearly? Imagine that with only a lantern to define the path. Each step became a test of faith and flame. Forests, too, were trials of light. Trees swallowed moonlight. Branches tangled above, and undergrowth seemed alive with hidden movement. In such places, lanterns created bubbles of safety. Beyond them, darkness pressed close, full of imagined threats. Wolves, thieves, or simply the unknown, all seemed to lurk just outside the glow. Yet the lanterns gave enough courage to keep walking. They marked the difference between paralyzing fear and steady progress. The road itself often bore marks of lanterns. Wax dripped from carried candles, soot smudged posts where lamps had rested, and ashes marked places where torches were discarded. These traces told silent stories of travelers who passed, of routes followed, of nights endured. By morning, they looked like debris, but at night they had been lifelines. So what do travelers' lanterns teach us about life before electricity? That light was not just for comfort, but for survival. A single flame guided horses, steadied hands, and carried hope across miles of darkness. Without lanterns, the world beyond town walls would have been nearly impassable after sunset. With them, it became challenging but possible. The lantern was more than an object. It was a companion. It flickered, smoked, sometimes failed, but it also endured. Travelers leaned on it, trusted it, and carried it with the same care one gives to a friend. And in its fragile glow, they found the strength to keep moving through the endless night. Have you ever thought about the people whose work made every flame possible? Before electricity, towns did not simply light themselves. Each candle, lantern, torch, and lamp was born from the hands of craftsmen and workers who shaped raw materials into brightness. Their labor was often hidden, but without them, towns would have fallen into unbroken night. Candle makers stood at the center of this effort. Their shops smelled of wax and smoke, their hands stained from repeated dipping. A single candle was not just a stick of wax with a string in the middle. It required patience. Wicks were twisted from strong fibers dipped into melted tallow or beeswax, cooled, then dipped again. This cycle repeated dozens of times, building up a candle layer by layer. Have you ever repeated a simple task so many times it became almost meditative? That was the rhythm of candle making. Steady, repetitive, necessary. Beeswax candles were prized for their clean burn and sweet scent. But beeswax was costly, requiring careful gathering from hives. Tallow, made from animal fat, was cheaper but smoky and foul-smelling. Families bought according to what they could afford, but both had value. A smoky flame still gave light, and light was survival. Did the makers see themselves as providers of life? Perhaps not in such grand terms, but they knew their work kept towns glowing. Lantern makers added their own skill. A lantern was more than a holder of fire. It had to shield against wind, yet breathe enough to keep the flame alive. Horn, thin and translucent, was often used in place of glass, glowing softly when lit. Iron frames gave strength, wooden ones gave lightness, and each design balanced protection with portability. Have you ever noticed how much difference a frame makes in carrying something fragile? The lantern frame was that difference for fire. Lamp makers prepared vessels for oil, shaping clay, metal, or glass into bowls with spouts for wicks. These wicks had to draw fuel steadily, neither too quickly nor too slowly. A poorly cut wick smoked and wasted oil. A well-prepared one burned bright and long. The craft lay in precision, trimming edges, testing flow, adjusting shapes. People who relied on lamps for work at night depended on these craftsmen, though they might never have met them. Torch makers, too, had their role. They gathered resinous wood, wrapped cloth tightly around shafts, and soaked them in pitch. Their work was less delicate, but no less important. Torches were needed for outdoor gatherings, for processions, for guarding gates. Without skilled preparation, they burned out too quickly or threw sparks dangerously. With care, they became reliable bursts of brilliance in open air. Even glassmakers contributed, glowing panels for lanterns, shaping globes for lamps, polishing surfaces until they shone. Glass was costly, but it transformed the reach of light, scattering brightness more widely. When people saw their rooms glow more clearly, they were seeing the skill of invisible craftsmen whose furnaces burned hot by day. All of these trades shared one truth. Their work was consumed quickly. A candle burned down in hours. A torch roared out in less. A lamp drained its oil steadily. Unlike a chair or a table, these creations were made to vanish. Have you ever worked hard on something you knew would be gone soon? That was their daily life. They labored knowing their product would disappear into smoke and ash. Yet that disappearance was proof of its worth, for while it lasted, it gave light. The craftsmen of light also shaped the economy of towns. Candles were sold in bundles, oil in jars, lanterns in sturdy frames. Families budgeted carefully, deciding how much brightness they could afford each week. Some saved their finest candles for special evenings while using cheaper tallow for ordinary nights. Markets smelled of wax, smoke, and oil, constant reminders that light was never free. And yet, despite the cost, people continued to buy because darkness was heavier than expense. The makers knew this, and so they worked steadily, turning raw material into hope. Have you ever considered how much trust lies in such work? People trusted that their candles would not sputter too quickly, that their lanterns would shield against wind, that their lamps would glow through the long night. That trust kept the trades alive. So what do the craftsmen of light teach us about towns before electricity? That every flame carried hidden stories. Behind each glow was a chain of hands, the beekeeper who gathered wax, the tallow worker who prepared fat, the blacksmith who forged frames, the glass blower who shaped panels, the candle maker who dipped patiently. Towns did not shine by chance. They shone because countless workers poured time into creating fragile sparks. Without these craftsmen, darkness would have swallowed streets and homes. With them, towns glimmered. Their work may have vanished nightly into smoke, but its impact lingered in every safe step, every warm room, every market that dared remain alive after dusk. And in that way the craftsmen of light left a glow that reached far beyond the flames they made. Have you ever thought about how different the world looks under firelight compared to the glow of electricity? We are used to bright, steady beams that reveal every detail in sharp edges. But before electricity, towns saw themselves through flickers, shadows and colors that change with every movement of flame. The night was not simply lit, it was painted by fire. Candles gave a golden glow, warm and soft. Their flames wavered, sending ripples across walls and ceilings. Have you ever held a candle close to a wall and watched your shadow stretch and shrink? In old towns, entire rooms lived within that dance. Shadows moved as people spoke, gesturing with hands that became tall shapes behind them. Children sometimes laughed at these figures while adults found comfort in their gentle sway. A single candle transformed plain walls into shifting theaters of light and dark. Lanterns painted the streets with circles, each flame shielded by glass or horn, spread out in soft gradients. The edges of these circles blurred, blending into shadow. Walking from one lantern to another felt like stepping across islands. Did this create mystery? Yes, because beyond each circle lay unknowns. Yet the glow itself promised safety, and people trusted the next circle would appear in time. Torches burned with fiercer color. Their flames roared orange and red sparks, leaping upward. They painted faces dramatically, highlighting eyes and cheekbones, turning ordinary gatherings into vivid scenes. Imagine a festival square lined with torches, every movement exaggerated, every laugh glowing brighter, every expression sharper. Torchlight created drama, a kind of stage upon which the town performed itself. Oil lamps brought steadier, wider flames. Their glow lacked the wildness of torches, but offered clarity. People working by lamp saw details more easily. Stitches in cloth, letters on parchment, seams in wood. The lamp's light was more modest in size, but dependable. Did people prefer it to candles? For work, yes, but for gathering, candles and torches carried more charm. Each flame had its own character, and together they gave towns a palette of light. The colors of firelight also shaped emotions. Warm hues created comfort, but flickers also carried uncertainty. Have you ever noticed how a flickering flame can make a familiar room feel alive, even slightly mysterious? Townspeople lived with that feeling nightly. Their homes and streets were never fixed in brightness. They shifted constantly, each flame changing with drafts of wind or passing footsteps. Shadows were not enemies, but companions. They grew tall in markets, shrank in alleyways, bent across bridges. People learned to read them. A moving shadow in the corner might mean someone approaching. A sudden stretch across a wall might reveal a gust of wind outside. Shadows told stories just as flames did. Did they sometimes inspire fear? Certainly, but they also guided, warned, and entertained. Even colors of objects changed under firelight. White cloth glowed golden, red fabric deepened to crimson, and metal gleamed as though alive. Imagine a shop window at night, goods arranged. Behind glass, their colors transformed by candle glow. What looked ordinary by day became rich and mysterious by night. This transformation was part of the magic of towns before electricity. The night sky itself joined the play of colors. Flames reflected off mist, glowed against falling snow, shimmered in puddles after rain. A torch-lit procession across wet cobblestones doubled itself, fire above and fire below. Have you ever stood near water at night and seen reflections multiply the light? Towns saw this often, and it gave the impression that the world itself was joining in the act of illumination. So what? Did colors and shadows of firelight mean to people? They were not just side effects. They were the very texture of their nights. Towns did not shine with uniform brightness, but with layers of moving, living light. Each flame added depth, each shadow gave shape. Together they created a world that was softer, warmer, and perhaps more mysterious than ours today. Without electricity, light was not only about vision, it was about mood, memory, and meaning. The colors of fire wrapped towns in warmth, the shadows gave them rhythm, and the flickers turned each night into a gentle performance. In that performance, people found beauty as well as safety, comfort as well as mystery. Have you ever thought about how deeply people remember light? We usually recall events, faces, or words, but in towns before electricity, memories were often tied to the way fire illuminated them. A candle's flicker at a family table, a lantern swaying in a windy street, a torch blazing during a festival. These moments lingered in people's minds because they carried not just sight, but feeling. Children remembered falling asleep to the golden shimmer of a candle, shadows dancing like tall companions across the walls. They remembered the comfort of that glow when storms rattled shutters and winds howled outside. Have you ever watched a single flame in darkness and felt safer just because it was there? For them, that was not a rare moment. It was nightly life. Merchants remembered long evenings in markets, stalls closed but torches still glowing faintly at the corners. Those flames marked the end of trade, the calm after noise, the breath before another day. Travelers remembered lanterns at gates, the sight that meant they had reached shelter. That glow, seen from afar, was etched into memory as a promise that the journey's hardships were almost done. Even watchmen carried their own store of memories. Their lanterns swung through countless nights, each flame holding stories. They recalled when the wind blew smoke into their eyes, when rain forced them to relight again and again, when snow made every glow look doubled against the white ground. Did they ever grow weary of carrying light? Certainly. But they also knew that their lanterns were the symbols of their watch. Without them, they were invisible. With them, they were protectors. Families cherished certain flames. The candle used for a wedding feast, the torches lit for a town celebration, the lamps that glowed during long winter nights. These were not just sources of brightness, but companions of memory. People spoke of them as if they had character, as though the flame itself had shared the moment. Have you ever looked back on a memory and recalled not only what you saw, but the way light fell across it? That was how townspeople remembered their lives, through firelight. Some memories carried beauty, others carried warning. People remembered the night a lamp tipped and almost caught fabric, the way smoke filled a room until windows had to be flung wide. They remembered torches guttering out too quickly, leaving a crowd in uneasy shadow. These memories taught lessons: to trim wicks more carefully, to place lamps on steady ground, to prepare extra torches for gatherings. Light shaped not only comfort, but caution. The memory of light also carried across generations. Elders told stories of the grand festivals when hundreds of torches burned, describing how the night seemed brighter than day. Children listened, wide-eyed, imagining fire transforming their town into something magical. Such tales were not about heroes or battles, but about brightness itself, proof that light was as much a part of community identity as walls, bridges, or markets. Even now, as you listen to this calm journey into the past, you are adding your own memory of light, not from a candle or torch, but from the picture painted in words. And if you wish to return for more such quiet histories, you may gently ask yourself to subscribe, so that each new story finds you, just as the glow of a lantern found travelers on dark roads. So what does the memory of light teach us about towns before electricity? That brightness was never only about vision. It was about comfort, identity, and remembrance. Flames may have been fragile and fleeting, but the feelings they created lasted far longer. Long after a candle melted ore, a torch sputtered into ash, its glow lived on in memory. Gentle proof that even the smallest spark could outlast the night. Have you ever wondered what it felt like when morning finally arrived in a town lit only by fire? After long hours of tending fragile flames, protecting wicks, and guarding lanterns, dawn was not just the start of another day, it was the release from darkness. People who lived before electricity knew the value of sunlight in a way we can scarcely imagine. As the first pale light spread across rooftops, candles were snuffed, lamps set aside, and torches left to burn out. The sudden shift from flickering glow to steady daylight was like a deep breath after holding one for hours. Have you ever stayed awake all night and felt the relief of sunrise? That relief was multiplied for towns where fire had been the only defense against night. Families welcomed daylight eagerly. Children ran to windows, laughing as they watched the sun dissolve the shadows that had crept across their rooms. Adults quickly opened shutters, letting fresh air carry away the smoke of burned candles and lamps. The smell of wax, oil, and ash lingered, but it faded under the brightness of the new day. In those moments, people felt not only safe but renewed. Merchants returned to the marketplace, seeing clearly again the stalls that had seemed mysterious under torchlight. Colors of cloth, fruit, and pottery revealed themselves in their true shades, no longer transformed by fire's golden hue. Have you ever noticed how different objects look in morning sunlight compared to dim evening glow? That daily transformation was dramatic for them, a reminder of how much light shaped perception. Watchmen, weary from carrying lanterns through the night, often paused at dawn to breathe deeply. Their duty ended not with fanfare, but with the simple satisfaction of seeing the sky brighten. Some lowered their lanterns with care, setting them aside until dusk returned. Others watched as towns stirred, doors opening, smoke rising from hearths, voices beginning again. Their work, unseen by many, was complete, and morning was their reward. Travelers, too, rejoiced at sunrise. Lanterns that had guided them along dark roads were extinguished, no longer needed. Horses stepped more confidently, carts rattled more smoothly, and faces once hidden in shadow were revealed. The relief was physical as well as emotional. Journeys became easier not because paths changed, but because light revealed them fully. And yet, even as sunlight conquered darkness, people did not forget the night's glow. They remembered the candle that burned low, the lantern that flickered bravely, the torch that roared against wind. These small flames had carried them until dawn, and though they melted, smoked, or sputtered, they had done their work. Have you ever thought about how fragile things often mean the most when tested? That was the truth of firelight. Its weakness made its strength more valuable. The cycle, repeated endlessly. Each evening people prepared for the return of shadows, trimming wicks, filling lamps, gathering wood. Each night they lived within the fragile circles of fire, and each dawn they released those flames, grateful yet aware that the darkness would come again. This rhythm shaped their lives, binding day and night together in constant exchange. Looking back now, what can we learn from the dawns that ended firelit nights? That light, whether from flame or sun, was more than vision. It was reassurance, renewal, and promise. The people of those towns did not see light as guaranteed. They saw it as earned. Their flames were small victories, their dawns great celebrations. So when the sun rose each morning, it was not just another day. It was the final chapter of a night-long story, written in wax, oil, wood, and smoke. A story of people who, without electricity, still refused to surrender to darkness. And in their refusal, they found beauty, in shadows that danced, in flames that wavered, and in the certainty that morning would always come. And so this history closes with sunrise, the moment when fragile flames gave way to steady brilliance, when towns breathed in relief, and when night's struggles faded into memory. For them, dawn was not ordinary, it was triumph. And perhaps even now, as we live in constant light, we can pause to remember how precious that daily victory once was.